I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Pam, would you roll call, please?
Mayor Klein.
Here.
Alderwoman Dobbs.
Here.
Alderman Fahy.
Here.
Alderman Donovan.
Here.
Alderman Bennett. Alderman Eidman.
Here.
Alderman Rainey.
Here.
Alderman Prince.
Here.
Alderman Steiger.
Here.
Mayor, we have a quorum.
Thank you very much. This time I will look for approval of tonight's agenda.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Okay. I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, no presentations or awards or personal appearances tonight, so we will skip down to the city administrator's report.
Updated report at your seats. The new items I added, one is that the Herald Candidate Forum is next Wednesday. We will host it here in the boardroom. Alliance began clearing an area up by the trail and soccer field, the Pierre Marquette Park. It's for a playground area that the park has purchased. We didn't spend all of our ARPA money on bathrooms. We had extra left over, but not enough for another bathroom. So we needed to get it spent, and we took that through the board and explained that to everybody. So we should have new playground equipment up there probably by end of March, beginning of April. And notice for bids have been sent out, posted for 9th Street repaving. This is part of the Prop S money that we're actually approving tonight. That was part of the project. It just is being done separately because it involves concrete and asphalt and stormwater, whereas everything else is either concrete or asphalt. So this is a more complicated project and will have to be done separately by a contractor with all of those items to be included. So we wanted to do it separately. We already have the plans, but we're good on that. We just have to get the bids.
Do we have a approximate time frame of how many days or weeks or that'll take and at what time of the year?
It will be over the summer when school's out. Don't have any timetable set yet. I haven't seen the specifications and the plans on that yet, so I'll let you know when I see that.
But because this is a rebuild, there will be closures.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it'll be a more difficult project than just repaving, but yeah.
Right. I've got a traffic thing. When would you like to talk about that? Now or at the end of the meeting?
I would say the end of the regular meeting. Yeah. Okay.
And then Happy, a question about item 6 on your report. What are the hours?
Oh, starts at 6. Starts at 6.
Starts at 6.
6:30?
Yeah.
Oh, I got 6 on my calendar, so make sure I'm here.
Thank you, sir.
Yep, sorry about that.
Any other questions, comments?
Would you go through number 4 with us too? Happy, I'm just a question. Normally you don't go through all your bullets. You just kind of pick some, and you do a really good administrative report, and you don't always go through the whole thing. They're always good topics. So I don't know why you pick and choose certain things to.
So I do that for time, and because I sent those items out early, I figure if somebody's got a question, they will call, let me know. So I don't try to hit everything. So I just try to recap. But if you have questions about item 4.
Well, I do. It's,
So we were in the process of putting that sidewalk in. Plans have been drafted. We had contacted MoDOT, NPS, the State Historical Society. Everybody had been contacted. We got all these approvals until we got to the state. They had some changes they wanted us to make. And then MoDOT shut us down to say, you haven't gotten the proper NPS approval. We got an NPS approval, but it wasn't through the system as we were supposed to get that. So once we did that, we then got into conversations with the Park Service, more of the National Park Service group, not the local folks, but those that are involved out of Omaha. They didn't like the concept that we had drafted, which was a standard 6-inch curb, 5 to 8 foot wide sidewalk that would run from Seraphin down to Hillside Lane. So once we got to that point, they gave us some recommendations. Then we got into winter they gave us recommendations and we were kind of waiting for them to tell us what would you rather have us do? But nobody gave us any direction. And I was kind of waiting for MoDOT to give us a little better direction as to what they would accept. Because once you start putting rock on the ground, it's a trail, not a sidewalk. So we weren't sure how to pursue it, but that was what the Park Service was requesting. So once we got to,
They want a gravel trail?
you can do compacted gravel or compacted, it's a.
That's what we have in
street.
front of the Roser building now, that pea gravel, and it wouldn't be like that, but it'd be similar, and it's been the bane of the downtown for the last 30 years since the river project went in, and they didn't let us do those sidewalks there in front of that, and
So that's similar to what the Park Service says about the Amaro House, is if we put something in that is like a regular sidewalk, say what's across the street, putting it in front takes away from that heritage, the heritage look. So we have come back to them with a
yeah.
lower sidewalk with like a 1.5 inch fade, but we're gonna try to. We haven't drafted this yet, but this is coming. So we have a 1.5 inch curb. We're gonna have to go into the street to do stormwater where we could have done it along the curb and then just had inlets. And then with the concrete itself, we'll probably do the same thing we did downtown and do the exposed aggregate to make it look a little rough. And we'll see if that's accepted or not. We're
Does any other homeowners down there put us through this kind of rigmarole to get this done?
I mean, nobody down there, but we haven't really gone down to, I mean, we had public hearings in that, but we haven't gone down to say we want to get some of your property for temporary construction easements. So we haven't done that door-to-door stuff yet because we have not been told we can do that yet.
Are we trying to get an easement onto their property? Is that why we're
We may have to.
easing them?
No, with Park Service, they have the right to say what goes in front because it is federal money that goes through MoDOT. And so MoDOT is shutting us down because NPS is holding us up.
So is that going to narrow the actual driving area or the width of the road?
It shouldn't. We were gonna, because we're gonna go back and pave it eventually, which is why we have to hold up now. But we weren't gonna go into the asphalt because we have a 10-foot right of way over to the property lines. So we had enough room to put it in. That wasn't an issue. So we should be able to put it in right where it is. But we have to make sure that what we put in now can then be blended better with the exit. The idea was to get it in first, then we could put the new asphalt in.
All right.
So now we're working backwards and we're gonna have to hold that up for a little bit.
I guess, but if they wanted compacted aggregate trail versus concrete sidewalks, are we gonna go through all this engineering work to redesign this? And they're still gonna turn us down?
We're gonna give them a sketch. We're not gonna go through the full engineering. It's gonna be a sketch. Yeah, they could turn us down.
And at what point do we say enough is enough? And none of the other property owners are fighting on this. And I guess I'm curious why they don't want concrete sidewalks to have access to their property, to have tourists and visitors to come, as opposed to trying to use a compacted gravel trail to access their property.
Because the compacted gravel, if you look at that, would be historical.
No, when they never had compacted gravel, I bet. I see.
So at what point did
They
we
had
stop? At what point did we stop? Can we put a dirt road in front of it too, so that the asphalt doesn't, I mean, it's kind of ridiculous what they're asking. The sidewalk's not gonna detract any more than the asphalt road does.
So, I mean, you're echoing what our engineer kind of felt after the meetings that we had with Park Service and with the state. So we're just kind of, we have that money sitting out there to put this in, so I hate to, we don't want to back out because I don't want to pay them back. Because we have had some payments for the engineering work. So we're still trying to move ahead, but we're coming up on our deadlines. So I'm not sure what the state's gonna require or allow us to do, but they're not giving us any more direction than what I'm telling you.
But, so that'll be the only area where we do something different, is to appease them.
Seems kind of contrary to the fact of the ADA,
ADA
whatever it is on
compliance.
sidewalks where you have to be handicap
We're trying to get people from the downtown out to their properties to be able to help them get more visitors, and then they're giving us flack about trying to,
walk on loose gravel compared to a nice concrete sidewalk.
going from an 8 foot down to 5 foot, you know?
Snow removal will be difficult too.
Yeah, so we're just trying to come up with something that they'll accept.
Fun.
Yeah. Anything else?
Any other questions? Okay,
Thank you.
thank you, Hep. This time we'll move ahead with staff reports, and first up tonight, we have Chief Steiger.
Good evening, everyone. You should have a copy of my report. Not a whole lot's changed in 2 weeks since my last appearance. I am happy to say that we did have an in-person application, and we did the background check. We brought him in Wednesday night for an interview, and we invited him back to training on Monday night. We're probably going to sign him up in the next week or so, so we'll be up to 25 of the 29 slots that we have on our roster. Left here last meeting and went out to the firehouse, and we had that severe weather spotter class going. We had pretty good attendance for that. We've got 2 people that continue in the firefighter 1 and 2 certification program. And I kind of mentioned it last meeting. We had 6 of us that went up to Missouri Fire School in Columbia in the first part of the month for an update on some training. And we've got a couple other classes scheduled later on this year out at the firehouse that are state certified classes. I did want to kind of bring everybody up to speed a little bit too. The fire district, I've been doing a lot of presentations to civic groups and things like that on my off time from here. Everything seems to be pretty well received. I do have a couple more coming up this week at Nutrition Center and another apartment complex, getting the word out some more. We are going to be part of the candidate forum next Wednesday night here. And I also have a town hall meeting scheduled for April 2nd, the week before the election, at the Progress Sports Complex, starting at 7 o'clock. So anybody that has any questions is more than welcome to come out and hear the presentation and ask any questions. I'll try to answer anything I can. Other than that, everything seems to be going well. It's been well received. We really haven't had any negative comments. Any questions? The one question that I kind of mentioned to the mayor the other day is I see the resolution for the rollback is part of the agenda tonight. I'm glad to see that. And the question I had was the other resolution that you guys had discussed, is that something that has to be done prior to the election, or is that something that can wait till after, or is there any kind of legal stipulations? I'm not a lawyer by any means. The equipment and the building and all that kind of stuff.
That'll be decided afterwards, because that'll be a negotiation between us and the future.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify, I'm not an attorney by any means, but I want to make sure I'm following all the rules and regulations on this. But everything seems to be well received so far with the fire district information we're putting out.
I guess my question is, can then this board, I know we can't obligate future boards, but can we set a resolution that our intent is to transfer property to the new fire district?
I think we have,
I would say 2 things. One is, the board can pass resolutions of precedence and it's non-binding on any subject. Secondly, any discussion of real estate, I believe, should be in closed session.
And we don't have it on, well, I don't know what's on the agenda for work session.
we have real estate, but it's not listed
Yeah,
as an agenda.
no, I get it. We've had that discussion in closed session before about that, and when we had our intent was talked about.
Well, you probably shouldn't be, let's not talk in any detail.
I did, yeah, exactly, I understand, and I agree with you, Mark, for sure.
Sure.
I'd like to get that on the next work session agenda to have that topic brought back up.
Okay. And that won't be done and wouldn't even be passed until after.
I get
you
it,
know,
I get it.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Next up tonight, community development, David Bova.
Good evening, everyone. You've got your report there. Heritage Commission meets Monday night, so they do have an agenda they'll be going over. Down under comprehensive plan, we met yesterday evening. We'll be bringing an annexation policy and plan to you at the next meeting for your review, so you'll get that in your packet for the next meeting. Down under the city county info, I just wanted to give you a quick update. I spent a little time in Jefferson City earlier this week. There are 2 bills introduced to allow the city and county to put lodging tax on the ballot in the future, HB 1302 and SB 169. We spoke about those. They seem well received, but we'll see how they work their way through the legislature this next couple months. Not much on the back. I did want to bring your attention to at the bottom there under property maintenance, the work that's been required and contracted for about the past 9 months now began about a week and a half ago, went by again today, and all the holes that were at the top underneath the chimney stacks have been patched, but I do believe there is more work to do, but they discovered some additional work that needed to be done while they were there. But that work is occurring. So if you remember, we were going to end up doing that work. It was going to cost us about $13,000, and the property owner is getting that work done. Any questions? Yes, sir.
Dave, can you refresh my memory on occupancy permits and what is the proper way that those should take place, mainly in rental property?
Unless it's short-term rental, like a VRBO, rental or non-rental would be the same process. They would call either the real estate agent, the owner, or seller or buyer, schedule an occupancy and inspection, and we would go out and do an occupancy inspection. If they don't schedule one, and they put the water bill in their name, which doesn't always happen, or the electric bill in their name, we will get a notification, and then we'll call them and tell them, you need an occupancy inspection.
Because I've been told there's a property in my ward that has pretty tough living conditions in and stuff, but the problem is with all the units there, I think there's only one water bill. So how do we catch them changing occupants? If they're not changing the name on the water bill or the electric bill, there wouldn't be a way to catch them. If they're changing the bill on the electric bill, which I don't know many landlords that pay the electric bill. Now it's delayed, right? So if someone changes their electric today, we're probably not going to find out until we get a report at the end of April. So it's possible they're living there for a while, but then we're going to reach out and tell them they need an occupancy. But if one of those 2 things isn't happening and they're trying to not have an occupancy, we don't have a way of knowing. Thanks.
Yep.
Any other questions?
Just got a comment. The meeting that you hosted for us on March 12th for the comprehensive plan committee, I want to thank you for all your work on the annexation, proposed annexation plan that you put together. I know you and Happy have put a lot of effort into that, and it looks really good. So I'm excited to bring it to the board and have the rest of the board look at it. So
Thank you, sir.
All right. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
And last up tonight, we have Tourism Director Aaron Smith.
Hello, everybody. I'm just going to go through a couple of little things. The tourism website, which is separate from the city website, I know we've been getting a lot of crossover there, is in the final phases. Along with that, we get our visit widget app for the city. We're just fine tuning the last few things. A lot of it is just copy, how everything's written on the website. That should launch at the end of this month. And this will be like a big major cog in fixing some of the problems with getting people here, and where we're sending people to when we're advertising. So if we send them to a working website, we should convert a lot more visits. The commercial that you guys saw last time, 15-second version of that is playing in all the visitor centers across Missouri through CTM Media. We've promoted it on Instagram. It's gotten a lot of great response. And I'm waiting to promote it using YouTube until the website's up because, again, why drive people to the website that we have right now? Small Town Showcase, Missouri Humanities will be in town next Tuesday. That's when the podcast will be recorded. I chose Bill Nagger and Queen Laura Jablonski, who was the Queen of St. Genevieve last year, to be guest. So you have, a guy that was raised here, raised kids here, started things like the French Heritage Festival and wrote a book about town. And then you have somebody from out of town, somebody from Kirkwood, Missouri, who just really loves what we offer. So you kind of have, two perspectives. So I think that'll be really fun when that comes out. And then in your package, you should have an article from St. Louis Magazine. One of the advantages of going with Blacktop Sailors, we were able to get St. Louis Magazine to do an article on our rebrand. So they really wrote a great article. It also had talked about the house tour that's going on this weekend. So it's a great piece of advertisement that we didn't have to pay for. So I'm pretty proud about that. Any questions? All right, thanks so much.
Thank you, Aaron. This time we will open up the floor to public comment.
Hello, Bob Brownie. I spoke to some of you about this, what I'm going to speak about before. I talked to the chief about it this morning. On North 5th Street from 7:15 in the morning till 5 minutes to 8, it's traffic, the speeders, one after another. For 20 years, I've been saying something about this traffic. The police can't do more of what they're doing. It's time that some speed bumps go in. I know people don't like them, but you know what? People don't like people going by their house 40 miles an hour. And I think it's time that, the speed bumps go out. There needs to be one before the intersection, which would be like almost in front of my house, and then one midway between the intersection of North 5th and Merchant, halfway up that hill before it crosses the hill, another speed bump. Because they hit that hill and they're flying to where they lock their brakes up because people are stopped at Jefferson Street and North 5th. And when you go up that hill, it peaks to the top. Somebody's going to end up getting run over, hurt, killed, and 2 speed bumps could eliminate it. If you put a stop sign in at the intersection, that's going to create a bad problem because people will be stopped all the way down to Market Street in the traffic. And then you're going to have people on Market Street running into people in the middle of the intersection. I mean, I've been thinking about this for 20 years. And a stop sign just wouldn't work. I think that'd be a bigger problem than what there is now. So I'm just asking if you guys would consider putting 2 speed bumps out. I appreciate it, and the other people would too. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Browning. Any other public comment at this time?
Hi, I'm Taylor Fells with Taylor Engineering out of Farmington. I know you guys have the first reading of our contract on your agenda tonight, so I just wanted to come out and introduce myself and our company and just say that we're looking forward to working with you guys. So if you have any questions when you read that aloud, just feel free to address them my way. So look forward to it.
Thank you very much. All right. Any other public comment? This time we will move on to tonight's consent agenda.
Discussion.
Yes.
Just let public know that inside the consent agenda, there's a resolution in there. The city is going to, if the fire district is passed, we have the intent to roll back a portion of the public safety tax for the local city residents if the fire district should pass. So your city taxes would go down. That's our intent to lower the public safety tax. So that's included in tonight's consent agenda, one of the resolutions in there. Move to approve.
Second. Okay. I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Move on to some old business. This is a first reading of bill number 4661. This is an ordinance of the city of St. Genevieve, Missouri, creating a no parking during certain times restriction on the west side of Virginia Street between Maple and Ridgeway.
I'm going to have a brief discussion. I think we all agreed. We met Tuesday with the school district. Chief Alec was there and several people from the school district. I think we were in agreement that there is a problem there. We were just not in agreement over how to solve this and stuff, but we did agree there was a problem. But and part of the question that I had did get answered up there was once the Early Childhood Development Center opened up, and I think right now they had 90 kids already signed up. You know, how that traffic was going to come out of there and how they were going to basically hold those cars, you know, in there and stuff. And they've got a plan. They went and visited some other school districts. They're going to kind of circle their building through their parking lot and create a path where they can stage all those cars. So that was a big question that I had, that I had voted to kind of table this and stuff. But anyhow, those questions were answered. I think they've got a workable solution for handling that early childhood. That's all I had.
I believe I have a motion.
If there's no motion, then it's just discussion and move on. Well, I would ask Bob, as Bill 4661 reads here, I mean, that's acceptable to the people in your board, and you feel like that's a workable solution?
Well, they're not in agreement with it, but like I said, I think everybody agrees there is a problem there and something has to be done, and this seems to be the only solution.
So you're in favor of it, Bob?
I'll reflect it in my vote.
Are you gonna make a motion to pass?
Pardon me?
You gonna make a motion to approve it?
No, I just brought up discussion.
I mean, I think we should bring it to a vote. I'll move that we move forward with Bill 4661. Make a motion to approve.
I have a motion. Do I have a second? Okay. There's,
I don't know after that.
okay, so if there is no second, then we will not vote.
Can we move it? I mean, I just don't have enough information on it,
That's fair.
because from what Bob's saying is a different problem than what I was told was going on up there, so, not that I'm saying yours isn't right, but, I would just like to know more about it before I vote yes or no on it.
Alderman Donovan, is there ongoing discussion on this, or are we?
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, I mean, with the parties involved.
I mean, I discussed it with them, and I think the officers have discussed it with them, and I think they're just going to have to deal with it.
Okay. All right. Okay, so we will move on. Move on to some new business. We're looking for an approval to amend the budget for tree maintenance at Memorial Cemetery. And you should have some info on that in your packet.
Second.
Okay, so I do have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. And we're also looking for approval of the low bids for the asphalt concrete paving 2025 as follows. Asphalt low bid was Vern Bowman Contracting, the amount of $3,195,814.99. Yeah. And then Concrete, low bid was SIC Concrete at $837,853.31.
Discussion.
Yes.
Happy you gave us a little brief the other day. Can you kind of go back through a number of bidders that you had and how you felt that the process went?
Process with Cochrane is always smooth and easy. You also have 2 reports from Cochrane to detail what their input was. So we had 4 bidders on the 4 bidders on the asphalt, but I believe a number of companies combined. So what we may have had as a full group on asphalt is actually some combined groups so that they could combine manpower and equipment. So you had low bid from Vern Bowman, and then you had 3 other bidders. Everybody was pretty close in the $3 million range. One of them was almost $4 million, but we're still we're about $300,000 less than estimate. And then on the concrete part, we had more individual bidders on that, I believe it was 6. And again, we came in with, on that, a surprisingly low bid of $837,000, or about $838,000. Everybody else was around the $1.1, $1.2 million range. So Cochrane did some background checks just to make sure we're getting a solid company, because you have to be responsive, which they were. You have to be responsible. That's what you're checking on. They will also have a payment bond that they have to present as part of the contract. So that covers if they can't complete the project. But yeah, they're about $300,000 less than the next lowest bid. But the references checked out, and again, we are protected by the performance bond. So the opinion is just to move forward with them. And we have done this with other companies that we are familiar with, and it's turned out well. We're hoping the same thing here.
What would you attribute to substantially cheaper price quote for the same work? How are they compromising? They pay their people less, they're using...
They can't, because it's a prevailing wage, so we'll have all that checked. They have, in the unit cost, you'll see where they've kind of dropped lower than the other companies. So it's usually the mechanicals or something else that they're just not charging what the other companies are charging. But I mean, they have to get the same work done. If it takes less manpower because they can get it done quicker, great. But they have to have figured that into their bid.
It's just, that's an alarming amount, raises concerns, but.
Same discussion, yeah.
Right.
Where are they out of?
St. Louis.
There's
Or Brentwood.
no one from Cochrane here tonight to,
No. That's why they sent the information on the sheets, on the recommendation.
So happy. I think certainly we're thrilled to have a bid, and that would save us that much money, but it won't do us any good if we consume that remainder of that money in change orders on the back end. Like, do you feel like we're in danger of approving some change orders on this work, or are we protected from that?
Should be protected from that, because this is the bid on the work that we have directly prescribed, and we have draft drawings. Instead of going in with, let's look at this and decide how we want to do this project, these are actual design drawings and actual amounts, distances. I mean, it's laid out in plans. So it's a little better than trying to just meet and discuss and come up with what those amounts should be. These are calculated, so these should be pretty solid.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it looks like they're line items 1, 5, and 7. Actually, all 7 line items are significantly lower than competitors. So the concern I would have is that obviously it's a closed bid process. Nobody knows the competitor bids, but a company can go in, quote unquote, buy a project off the table, hoping on the back end that they've got their foot in the door, secured that work, and then they can change order and then make up the difference on the back end. But we're not entertaining that.
Well, one of the things that I can say with this, and I've been asked to make sure we hold pretty tight to our contracts on these, is that when we did the section of Parkwood between Point Base and Oakwood, the base of that, the dirt, was in good shape. So we know we're not getting into some muck that's gonna cause us problems and have us, or we need to dig out and replace that and improve it. We should have good soil of which we're gonna be putting the rock and putting the concrete down. So we know what we're getting into in that respect. Yeah.
One more. So we're at about 4 million, for contracting. I don't know what Cochrane's total engineering cost, but, we're getting probably close to that number with the bond that we're trying to set up tonight. How are we doing on funds for?
So we figured 6.5 for the city streets and 3.5 for the subdivision. So we're getting there, but these are the first ones are the main ones. The others are gonna be with water projects that we've got to figure out how to get installed. So we're more than halfway there.
And those will be more probably towards next year.
Easily next year, not the year after. Yep.
Happy, I guess the one, the first item on there, the aggregate base, huge difference there.
They're taking some of that aggregate from the national park sidewalks and everything.
Well, I think, right, they're getting, right, but I mean, that's the life of that concrete is that base and stuff and the compacting and, the other one that really stands out, this mobilization, which basically is them getting their equipment here and back. $2,000, $75,000. I mean, there's a broad range in all of them to $91,000. I don't know. I really wish somebody from Cochrane was here. There's just some big amounts there that are different and big concerns on my part, but.
It's 30% almost. So, I mean, it's a big difference from the next lowest bidder. It's 30% lower than, so. I mean,
that's concerning, but.
It's exciting and concerning.
Can you talk to us a little bit about the core sample that will be taken and the testing procedure? I mean,
because we've already done cores on the streets to see what's there. Is that what you're?
Well, I'm saying on when this work is performed, when it's over, there will have to be some kind of a test, right?
Oh, so I mean, part of our contract with Cochrane was besides the engineering to draft it is the construction engineering. So yeah, they'll be out there watching this process. And every day, and whenever they need to be out there to make sure they put in the rebar, they put in the rock that they need to, that they put in the concrete as appropriate, check it, make sure that it's got the right slump to it, all that. So yeah, we'll be watching over it.
Yeah, I don't want to get too lost in picking apart this deal and not celebrate the fact that it's as low as it is. But I mean, the end result is it's paramount that it be done the right way. So.
Move to approve?
That's just.
You need a second. I'll second that.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? We'll move on to a first reading of Bill number 4662. This is an ordinance authorizing the mayor to execute an agreement for engineering services with Taylor Engineering LLC for the Crestlawn Cemetery expansion design.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And lastly, we've got a first reading of Bill number 4663. This is an ordinance authorizing and directing the issuance, sale, and delivery of general obligation bonds, Series 2025 of the City of St. Genevieve, Missouri, prescribing the form and details of said bonds, providing for the levy and collection of an annual tax for the purpose of paying the principal of and interest on said bonds as they become due, and authorizing certain other documents and actions in connection therewith.
Some discussion here.
Yes.
One, I didn't get a chance to read this updated version. What changed?
This has the actual amounts of the bonds.
Oh, the amount.
As they sold for.
Okay. Can we talk about anything about the bonds and the rating now, or?
It's- I would say.
Another question to me, what are you talking about?
I guess I had a concern, when we got our ratings back and stuff, of just a A-rated bond. I was sold originally from your original time here that we would come out much better than that. And then whenever we got the reasonings for those, brought up a lot of questions.
Okay. I was thrilled with an A-rated bond. That is a high, mid investment grade. Investment grade goes from BAA on up. The federal government is AA. So having a single A, I would have loved to have gotten an A+. That was what I was hoping for.
Right.
That's what I was hoping for that.
Right.
Talking to him, but getting an A, I think it was very, very promising. The purchaser who bought this Stiefel Nicholas went out and bought insurance for it. So the issue was going to be sold as a AA rated issue. So, but that was their call, not ours. But your issue sold very well because of that A rating. It ended up getting, I don't know if you had it there, an average interest rate of 4.054%. Which is very attractive. They got a second bid to show how competitive it was, came in at 4.11.
I guess my one question I had and stuff was, what was the term after the A-rated?
Stable.
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 Yes.
Yeah, I'd never heard of that before, and just curious about that.
That is that is kind of something newer than what 10, 15 years ago. You didn't see it. You'd get just a stable. You would just get a rating. Now they look deeper and say everything in the finances looks like there's no immediate changes coming on. I had a community got re-rated. It was an A+, and they ended up being with, instead of stable, negative. Thought things were looking down on them. It is what you want to see, is seeing a stable A-rated, that they don't see change coming at this time in the audits, in your numbers. Now that you can go back to them at any time. If things change, you get more money coming in, we can go and get them, we can urge them to look at you again. But unless you have another issue, there's no real reason to get that done.
The one, I guess the biggest thing was the low cash reserve comment. Did they give us any indication of where's the right number?
No, they don't give that. They just say, this is where we see you. And one thing to keep in mind, that's a snapshot. That is what they saw in your audits and the discussion on what has happened. It was that rating was for, in effect, that day. That, for really this issue. It is something, and so it can change up and down based on your income, but no, they do not make recommendations. That if you get a recommendation, that tends to come from an auditor or the city administrator if they wants to make it, but that is not their job.
So if that can change at any time, what effect would that have once the bonds are sold?
It's a great question. That is, it is one of the reasons why some deals, they assume you're going to continue, and that's why they have the stable. That you're going to, they've looked in the past, they see you now, they predict in the future that you're a stable community, you're not going to make major changes, and they don't see that. I told Happy he was an absolute rock star on the meeting, at that meeting. He knew the answers, which is what you want. The question would come up, he had an immediate answer. He knew what they were looking for, and how to put it in the right terminology. Again, he did just a fantastic job selling you to them. But you're exactly right. Things can change and have, can change on a town. A town could go and in 6 months, spend all the money that they thought, that they had in reserves and make changes. That is one of the reasons there's a continuing resolution or a continuing disclosure that is now required, that every year you send your audits to a company called Emma where they have it filed. So when your bonds get traded in the secondary market, there is a place that anyone can go to see what is going on with your audits. You're also now required, where a number of years ago you weren't, you were required, again, Gilmore and Bell is doing this for you, and it's part of the fees in this project, is to keep your official statements up. And so that people can see the trend that you have in your population, in your sales tax, in your water and your sewer account. They will work with Happy going forward. I think their contract for the next 5 years to keep that up to date on Emma, so somebody has a place to go to look to make sure that you are just as stable now as then as you are now. So, and years ago that was not the case. They would, but that is something that is there, and it's for the protection of the purchasers.
You talked about the secondary market. I mean, what is that?
The secondary market, these bonds are all sold. And they're made sure they are bank qualified. Now, most of these bonds will never hit the secondary market. Somebody buys them, they hold them to maturity. However, these will go out. Some of these bonds will go out 20 years. Somebody in some estate may die and they sell those bonds in the secondary market. Somebody trades them for whatever they bought them. They thought they bought a 15-year maturity. They want to sell them after 5 years. They have their, they can sell them, and it's all done through underwriters, through investment banking behind the scenes. But there is a secondary market for that. McCliney and Company would be one that, especially on an issue that we would underwrite if somebody was selling them in the future, that would contact us and say, well, what do you think these bonds are worth? And we'd make a market for them.
Questions answered.
Feel good.
Any other discussion?
Mayor, did you have some questions about this last week? That I know one.
We were no, not anymore. No, I mean, I think there's a lot of questions leading up to, what's the market going to look like for these once they do open? But I mean, I think I was pretty pleased with the rate. And then in year 5,
yeah, it switches from 5 to 4.
Could refinance if it was advantageous to do so.
Yeah, it's your call. There is a 5-year call, meaning that you can call. Now, no one can force you to do it. It's only if it's to your benefit.
Why would you call bonds back?
Lower
You refinance it, just like you'd refinance your house.
Yeah.
Move to approve.
Okay. Okay, I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. There is, looking for a second reading if possible tonight.
Motion for a second reading.
What's the reason for a second read?
Because we need to finalize this.
Yeah.
Because the bonds,
Because I'm sorry.
because the bonds had sold.
I make that motion.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion and a second for a second reading. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, this will be a second reading of Bill number 4663. This is an ordinance authorizing and directing the issuance, sale, and delivery of general obligation bonds, Series 2025, the city of St. Genevieve, Missouri, prescribing the form and details of said bonds, providing for the levy and collection of an annual tax for the purpose of paying the principal of and interest on said bonds as they become due, and authorizing certain other documents and actions in connection therewith.
Motion to approve?
Second.
Okay, have a motion and a second. Pam, would you do a roll call, please?
Alderman Steiger,
Yes.
Alderman Prince,
Yes.
Alderman Rainey.
Yes.
Alderman Eidman. Alderman Donovan.
Yes.
Alderman Fahy.
Yes.
Alderwoman Dobbs. Yes. 7 yes, 0 no's, 1 absent. Bill number 4663 now becomes ordinance 4583.
Thank you very much. And that will conclude our scheduled business. Anything else to discuss? Alderman Donovan?
I think he left, but the possibility of those speed bumps on Fifth Street, I mean, can we legally have speed bumps?
So they're calling them speed humps now.
Or speed bumps?
But it's a whole different concept where it's a larger amount of surface area that is made for people to slow down and go over. So I don't know if anybody's bumped into them or not, but you'll see them in St. Louis and in neighborhoods. I haven't had a chance to look at what the requirements are, because that's a fairly short block from market to merchant. And I'm not sure technically where it would have to go is probably at his driveway, so he doesn't want that. So I don't know if it would have to go further and we can just do one, but I haven't had time to get the specifics on that.
Yeah,
That's what I'm thinking of, if we do that.
yeah, if you have time, I mean, it might be, I'm not saying yet, I'm convinced we need to put one there, but, or two of them there and stuff, but, I would like to know, a little more about them if we can and what they would look like.
But remember, if we do one, we're probably gonna get requests for others because of,
Do we have any in town?
No.
So what, do we have criteria?
that's what I'm trying to gather. I don't have any, I haven't looked at the engineering on what that is yet. I've seen it.
Engineering, what would be police reports, would be required radar speeds, it would take more than one guy saying, I think people are going too fast. I'm like, wow.
Well, and that would be the question for the police department, so that was what I would bring in for a work session that we would talk about it then.
Yeah, the problem up there, I mean, with parking on the street, I don't know where an officer would stage up there, that he wouldn't be blocking somebody's driveway or something. It's close area, but I don't know, just like to, as you have time to check into it.
Chief, have you had a chance to look at this? Has this been brought to your attention before tonight?
No, well, I mean, other than just talking with Bob on it.
So you haven't had a chance to look? Okay.
Okay. So we'll research and
We'll bring it back as a work session item.
that work. Any other business to discuss at this time? Okay, if not, we will adjourn and move into work session. To order. At this time, I will look for approval of tonight's work session agenda.
Motion to approve.
That's far enough. I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Take us to work session agenda item number 1, and we have Carl Brown with us to go over the water and sewer rate analysis.
Good evening, everybody. Yes, I'm Carl Brown. I'm the president of GettingGreatRates.com. A little introduction for all of you, because you haven't seen or heard from me yet. Happy and Sue worked with me a lot, so they've gotten to know me pretty well. But just a little intro, because it helps you to assess what it is that I'm going to tell you, what I put in the report, what I recommend, all those sorts of things. I've been consulting on rate analysis, mostly water and sewer, privately since 2005. I've done 393 analyses since then. I do about 15 or 18 or so per year, and it's been pretty consistent through the years. Before 2005, or before I left previous employment, I worked for the Missouri Department of Natural Resources, partly or for a time in the Water Pollution Control Program, and then later as a technical assistance provider, and then the unit chief for the government unit in what we call the Technical Assistance Program. In that work, my part of it, I had a unit that did lots of technical stuff, but my part of that unit's work was, back then I'd have to call them rate calculations or rate studies. They were simpler than rate analysis, mainly because the state of Missouri, Missouri DNR, did not need to know or consider all of the things that you all need to take into account when you're trying to figure out where to set your rates. But it's very similar. The core of what I did for 14 years with Missouri DNR was very similar to what I've done since 2005. So I spent the vast majority of my career as a rate analyst. I started off in a whole different field before that, probably like lots of people. But since 1993 up to now, I've been either a rate analyst or a guy doing water and sewer rate studies. I do a few other utilities too, but water and sewer are probably 95% of what I do. I do what I call cost of service rate analysis, and in the business it's usually called cost of service rate studies, and most of that other kind, rate studies, that is a little better description of what these things usually are like. A rate study will commonly consider expenses for 1 year and calculate, if it's a cost of service rate study, calculate minimum and unit charges on a cost to serve basis, the reason for the name of it. Analysis, the permutation that I do, considers lots of other things that may affect rates or that rates may affect, and I project incomes, expenses, capital improvements, basically everything, for 10 years. I don't just look at 1 year, I look at 10 years worth of, well, one past year of yours, and then the current year, the year that I analyze in, and then 10 years into the future. As I think of it, rate analysis and setting rates must be future looking, must be future oriented. It's not good to set rates just based on what your expenses were last year or even this year, because your expenses in water, your expenses in sewer may be, and truthfully they usually are, real different, and they usually are lower right now than they will be in the future. Most of the time I get hired because a utility or a town or a city has plans or has needs of doing really expensive capital improvements. You talked about $4 million worth of street repair. You can real easily spend $4 million doing something in water or in sewer in a town your size. So that kind of expense you're not tackling under your current rates because you can't pay the debt service under your current rates. So if you have plans of doing capital improvements, and you all do, then you're going to need higher rates to be able to pay for that plan. So that's the normal reason why I get hired. The utility just needs more money to be able to pay approaching expenses. The other reason why I get hired is because while I'm projecting 10 years, I'm also doing cost of service rate analysis, figuring out the nature of the costs so that you can set minimum charges and unit charges that are in proportion to the nature of the costs. That's probably about as much as you need to hear introductory-wise for me, but then also what it is that I do and then what I have done for you all. I'm going to get into a few kind of like details. Some of them will be details, but I really wanted to lay that out for you so you have a kind of a framework to think about that report that I gave to you and what it is that I found and recommend. So I'll hit a few high points or a few key things, and I'm going to give you the page numbers in the report as I do that, so you'll be able to flip through and find what it is that I'm talking about. Now it's kind of natural for somebody who writes a 40 or 45 page long narrative report and then a whole bunch more pages that are reprints of models that they use to calculate rates. It's kind of natural for them to think that all parts of that are really, really important, and that's why I put it all in there. For somebody, all of that is important to at least be aware of. You all don't need to know everything that's in the report. Mainly, you need to get a good sense of what your situation is right now in water, in sewer, the rates that you have right now, what I found, the big drivers anyway, and then what I recommend you do to your rates. I am recommending adjustments, both in structure and in level. So the rate level, or think of it as the revenue that those rates will generate, the revenues need to go up in water and in sewer. And the structures need to be adjusted to be closer to cost of service. But I do have a few adjustments to the adjustments that I calculated for your rates, and that's important to talk about too. So on page 6, starting near the top of the page, and I'm not going to say all the words that I've got in these bullet points, but what I want to point out by talking about these things are these are things which I considered, which Happy asked me to analyze and figure out the effect of some of these, well, what if this happens situations. I didn't show you the models for all of these what if these happen situations because the report's long and I don't want it to be 175 pages long, and it would have been like 175 pages, and that would not end up changing the rates that I found most advantageous for you all, closer to cost of service and simpler than other alternatives. So I'm recommending that you adopt a set of water rates, set of sewer rates that are pretty simple. One minimum charge for in-town customers, a different minimum charge but higher for out-of-town customers, and then no other fancy things. Unit charge, same sort of structure. One unit charge, the fee, the price per 100 cubic feet, the way you structure it right now, the fee per 100 cubic feet needs to go, in one case, down, but in sewer, up. And what I found when I analyzed for different alternatives that you might use for adjusting rates, structure, and level, the level doesn't make any difference what structure you adopt. You need more revenues in water and sewer. So the level needs to go up the same amount, regardless of structure. Structure is the only variable. One of the things that I considered is that number 1 bullet point, paying for all system improvements basically with cash. Reserves, current incomes, whatever capital improvements you think you need to do, pay with cash. I think you would like to pay with cash, and all of us would love to have enough cash laying around that we can pay for capital improvements with cash, but not everybody can buy a new house with cash. We got to finance some things, and your capital improvement needs are pretty big. So paying with cash, while it would be great, and truthfully, you could set rates where you could pay with cash, but you would have to set the initial adjustment, the initial rates much higher to be able to pay with cash. Also, when you pay with cash, you are causing ratepayers, because the rate is going to immediately go up a lot, you cause current customers to pay the lion's share of the capital improvement cost, which is going to benefit users of the service a long time into the future. When you build water and sewer improvements, they usually have a useful life on the low end of 20 to 30 years. Some of it is good for 70, 80 years. So if you make folks pay with cash right now, they're paying full freight for the improvement, but there are going to be generations of customers benefit from that improvement in the future. Now, when you pay with borrowed money, and you're already talking about that right now with streets, but when you pay with borrowed money, yes, you pay interest, 4% in that case. With an SRF loan, it's probably going to be quite a bit cheaper than that, but you're going to pay interest. But by stretching out payment of the improvement, you better match the timing of when people benefit from the improvement. So the current generation is not going to pay all of it. They're going to pay while they are a customer. When they move away, they pass away for whatever reason, they're not a customer anymore, their house, their business, whatever gets owned by somebody else, they become the payer of the debt service. So by borrowing, you're able to stretch or spread those expenses more closely related to how long somebody's a customer. So that very first one, I told you lots of things that are not even in the write-up, but I assumed that you will end up borrowing for a lot of the water improvements and not quite as much of the sewer improvements, because most of the sewer capital improvements, what you have listed as capital, that's not normally loan financed. So I did figure you would pay more on a current basis for those kinds of things, but you have most of those things stretched out through time anyway. So paying with debt rather than cash, basically when you can do that advantageously. Phasing in new rates. Your adjustment for most customers is not going to be so great that you get a whole lot of benefit by phasing in the initial adjustment. For some of your customers, the phasing, actually, their bill's going to go down because of rate restructuring. They're not paying right now on a cost of service basis. So if you phase, then their bill would go up less in the first year, and then the second year of a 2-year phasing, their bill would go up the same as everybody else's bill on a percentage basis. So you end up only getting roughly half as much rate restructuring as you otherwise could. So phasing does, because the bills are not going to go up all that much, phasing does not benefit you all or the customers very much. And then the last item, a marginal rate for your biggest customer, Mississippi Lime Company. That customer, you could, if you wanted to, assess that company on a marginal cost basis. Think of it as a wholesale rate, but they're out of town. You do not have a policy for charging out-of-town commercial customers a different rate than others. So you're going to have to change your policy if you go that route. So I calculated rates that have the Mississippi Lime Company pay the same rate as all other commercials outside of town, and actually it's other customers too. So those are three things that I considered. I actually ran the numbers. I discarded them because they don't give you very much benefit, or they add complication to the structure. That left me with two rate models to report to you, the ones out of which I recommend you adopt rates. So those shorthand in the report, I just call Water Model 1 and Sewer Model 1. Those other models exist, but they just add complication at this point. Next up, I want to talk about a few things which, in discussion with Happy, I feel pretty sure these things are going to come to pass. One is expected growth. That's on the bottom of page 7. There's a subdivision has applied to the city for authorization to, or a developer to build a subdivision. As I recall, it's about 157 lots. And I don't know how long that may be built out over, but I just made the assumption that it would be built out over about, or at a rate of about 25 lots or homes built per year. I also assume that it won't start this year. It'll start next year, but there will only be 10 homes put in the first year. Then it's 25 per year. And then we end up, and I think that takes about 7 years if I remember right. And then you go back to what your historic growth rate has been over time, which is about 4 new homes or new somethings built per year. So if the subdivision happens, it'll build out over some time. I could be wrong in that assumption about 25 a year, but I'm hoping that if I'm wrong, it's that it'll stretch out less time than what I assumed. In other words, you will, if it builds out sooner, you will collect system development fees and you will have those new customers sooner. You'll generate more net revenue than what I've calculated. So I've tried to be conservative on that one. I assume that one will happen. Now, I also ran a model that assumed, well, what if it doesn't happen? And of course, if it doesn't happen, because these new customers or the developer would pay system development fees or connection fees, as you probably still call them, the developer would pay that, and the new customers would become customers, and they would use water, they'd use sewer, and they're going to pay user charge rates. So your net revenue is greater with those folks, those properties as customers. Less if it doesn't happen. But it really appears that that will happen. If in a year or two you find out the developer has just gone cold on it, we're not going to be able to go that way, then we can do an adjustment to the model, say in a couple of years, and then we go back to that assumption. It's not going to get built. The rates will need to be higher. I would be able to show you how much higher on a current basis, but it does appear that that one is going to happen. Borrowing. Again, I assume that you will borrow. Last item, and this is just kind of a technical item. Units of measure, you measure water and sewer service by 100 cubic feet. That's your billable unit. I don't see cubic feet used as water and sewer unit charges anymore. On the East Coast, it's more common. You get to the Midwest and then on out to the West, and it's really uncommon. And it's a really hard unit to measure for a customer to try to make some sense of what the water bill, why is the water bill, how much it is. Well, you pay, I think it's $5 and change per 100 cubic feet. And then they go, well, what is that, 100 cubic feet? They cannot make comparisons. In this country, most liquids that we buy are measured in gallons, almost always in water and sewer. The unit charge is in gallons. And in fact, it's in thousands of gallons because the unit charge is so darn cheap almost everywhere that if you told folks what the bill was per gallon, it'd be 0.0015 or something like that parts of a dollar. And then again, they can't really wrap their head around, what way less than a penny is. So almost all water and sewer service is sold per 1,000 gallons. And I recommend that you go ahead and make that change. And I calculated the unit charge rates in the models and in the report in the lettered tables in cubic feet and in gallons. So whichever way you want to go, you can see what the unit charges would be. But I do recommend you make that switch. That will make it a lot easier for your customers to figure out, well, how does my water bill compare to buying milk or gasoline or lots of other things? There is one adjustment that I made to the cost of service rate structure, and I did this one to reduce the rate shock, is what we usually call it. People are really surprised, not in a good way, whenever they see what their bill would be under the new rates. On a straight cost of service basis, your minimum charge would need to be $5 higher than what I actually calculated it at for the final rates. In other words, I calculated the minimum you needed, and then I lopped off $5 because your minimum charges are amazingly cheap. I just don't see minimum charges like that anymore. Even in pretty good sized cities, I'm usually seeing a minimum charge of $15, maybe $20 a month. You're a small city, so you don't have much economy of scale. That means you got a lot more fixed costs. That means the minimum charge needs to be higher. You're down in the $5 or $8 per thousand or per customer per month sort of range. At $5, you're not covering fixed costs. In fact, you're barely covering calculate the bills and bill people kinds of expenses. So the minimum needs to go up a lot, but it would be shocking to low volume, mostly paying just the minimum charge, maybe 1,000 or 2,000 gallons a month. It would be shocking for them to see how much their bill would go up. So I took $5 off of everyone's minimum charge. That means the unit charge has to be a bit higher to bring in the same revenue. That reduces the rate shock for the low volume customers. Maybe you'll stay there. Maybe you'll work your way up more on the minimum charge in future adjustments. But to start off, I didn't want to be real shocking to folks. That's one difference. Now I'm going to skip some pages and get you to Water Model 1 discussion, which starts on page 12. I'm not going to talk about most of the subsections in there, but I considered where your system development fees, usually called connection fees, where those need to be able to pay for at least a notable percentage of the cost of building capacity, build a new treatment plant, put in new lines, replace stuff. Those all cost a lot of money. Almost nowhere do water and sewer utilities have a new connection fee that's high enough to fully pay for cost of capacity, the cost to build the stuff, replace the stuff. We just don't do that. And that's not totally bad because there are grant and loan programs, subsidized loan and grant programs available if your median household income 5,000 gallon per month residential customer, if their bill is going to be too high, then you end up qualifying for the interest subsidy and sometimes for grants. Although in the state of Missouri, the grants are getting pretty slim to be able to find. You do not necessarily need to pay full freight for building capacity, replacing lines, doing things like that. You may be able to take advantage of interest subsidized loans. Probably you can, and less chance of it, but you may be able to get a grant or at least a partial grant to pay for some improvements. But system development fees, I calculated on a meter size basis, and actually it's a capacity to pass peak flow basis for different meter sizes and types. So in the lettered tables, and tables A and B are going to come up pretty quick, you'll see that I've got meter size and type listed. I only did that just so I would be able to show you what the system development fee based on the cost to serve bigger meters, have them pay at least a proportionate share of those costs. Each one of those meter sizes and types has a system development fee. But then you'll see that the minimum charge is the same for everybody. The unit charge is the same for everybody. When it comes to the regular user charge fees, it's going to be real simple for you, just like it is right now. There are other things, other criteria that the rates that I calculated are based on, and then those rates have what we call an affordability index. And the affordability index description starts on the bottom of page 15. Affordability index is really important to the grant and loan agencies, state and federal. Now, federal calculates it on a statewide basis, but they're still going after affordability. The notion or the basis is this: residential customers only, the ones that use 5,000 gallons of service per month, and the median household income for the jurisdiction. So it'll be the city of St. Genevieve. So those are the criteria for calculating the affordability index. Now, in reality, your average in-town customer, you got some commercials mixed in too, and they're not differentiated, and that's fine. But your average in-town customer uses 2,900, and I can't remember the change, gallons per month. That's about 2,000 gallons less than this affordability index. It's 5,000 gallons. So the real affordability for your average customer is going to be more affordable than what the index shows. But the affordability index is what the grant and loan agencies look at. Right now, your affordability index on water, and this shows up on the top of page 16, the affordability index for the test year, so that was last year, the year that we pulled data from, 1.11%. That means this kind of customer spent 1.11% of their household income to pay the water bill. And then in sewer, you'll see in a little bit, the affordability index for your current sewer rates is 0.8%. It's 0.8%. So they're spending about, for water and sewer together, if they use 5,000 gallons of water and sewer, they probably use less for sewer. But if they did, it would be about 1.9% of their income to pay the water and sewer bill. That's where they're at right now. The national average is about 1%. So on water, you're a little bit over the national average right now. On sewer, you're quite a bit less than the national average. It's 1% for both. And between the two, if you add them both together, even at the new rates, you're still going to end up being not much over the national average. And I say it that way because almost all of my clients end up with rates that are well over the national average. The reality is we're booking along, and we're paying certain rates, and we're doing a certain amount of improvements and things like the expenses are accruing mostly at the rate at which you generate revenue. That's the restriction on the improvements, fixes that you all can do. You have a lot of fixes, a lot of improvements that you need to do. To tackle those, you need more revenue. So almost always, my clients end up going to an affordability index on one or the other utility, about 1.3 to maybe 1.4%. And then for a total between water and sewer, about 2.5. And at 2.5, they're getting in the vicinity of being eligible for grants. You're going to be well below that. So I'm skeptical that you'll get grants, but you might be able to qualify for a grant here and there to do maybe a neighborhood that's low income or something along those lines. So that's the affordability of the rates. Starting on the top of page 17, this is my kind of like little cookbook of how I think you should go about adjusting rates. I'm assuming you will adopt new rates early enough they'll be effective June 1. Now, you might be a little earlier if you really get after it. If you want to mull this over for a while, it might be July or August. Don't wait a long time because you need more revenue for water and sewer. But it's not going to kill you because you do have some reserves. Now, he wasn't Gilmore and Bell, but I wasn't sure what firm he was with who's selling your bonds. He was talking about the rating agencies look at your reserves, cash reserves, to figure out how high to rate you. Your reserves in water and sewer are really low. They're actually dangerously low. They need to be much higher. On water, as I recall, after 10 years, you need to be up to $1.5 million in cash equivalents. For operating reserve, equipment repair and replacement reserve, capital improvements and debt reserve, for all those kinds of reserves that you need to put together so that the rating agency or so that the state or the feds will want to lend to you, you need to be on your way to building those sorts of reserves. So I've got a little bit of instruction on how to adjust, when to adjust, also how and when to make future adjustments on your own. I've calculated the initial rates that you need, but I've also assumed that you're going to raise rates each year by 4%. So every year raise rates by 4% if your costs average going up by 3%. So I call it backloading, and I think a lot call it that. I've backloaded your initial rate adjustment again to reduce the amount of shock that folks will feel immediately. So you need to raise rates 1 percentage point in the future faster than what inflation in the water and the sewer budget is. And then the really important part is Table A and Table B for water. So go ahead and flip, and you'll see that I've got the meter sizes, meter types. System development fee starts out at $800 for a small meter, a 5/8 or 3/4 inch meter. I think most analysts real commonly recommend the same system development fee or connection fee for 5/8 and 3/4 inch meters, because the vast majority of residential customers are hooked up with either a 5/8 or 3/4 inch meter. Not too many 1 inch, rarely a 2 inch meter. You're talking commercial, even getting into industrial when you get to those sizes. So having the same system development fee for what will end up being basically all or nearly all of your residential customers makes it a lot easier for you to talk to a developer or an individual who is wanting to build a home. If it's residential, we're going to recommend that you have a 5/8 3/4 inch meter, and this is the system development fee. But the fee goes up with meter size. The minimum charge is $12.50. I didn't arbitrarily arrive at $12.50. The $12.50 was generated by the cost classification and the level that I needed the rates at to generate the right revenue. So $12.50, but it is kind of handy that it came out to a fairly even number, makes math easier. $12.50 minimum charge. If you continue to sell by 100 cubic feet, it's $5.17 per 100 cubic feet. That is the equivalent of $6.91 per 1,000 gallons. That's in town. Out of town is 50% more. That's the way you go now. So, and that's, as I say it, that's the most common differential for out-of-town service. They pay 50% more than whatever the rates are in town. Lots of reasons for that, but that is common practice, so I recommend that too. You can see what those rates are. That's water. Now, almost everything that I would need to say about sewer, I've already said about water. You know, this cost of service thing, you have various assumptions, you're going to have a subdivision built, all those sorts of things are the same for sewer. The only differences are what the expenses actually are and where you're starting at right now with sewer rates. So we can go straight to page 21, how to implement the sewer model on rates. And you'll see that I just tell you for all the basic stuff, all those instructions, use the instructions I gave you for water, because you need to do the same sorts of things. But table C shows you the system development fees and minimum unit charges for sewer in town, and D is out of town. Minimum charge $12.02. When I give you a number that's down to the penny, that's what the model calculated. When you actually adopt rates, you may want to do some rounding to make it easier for the clerk when somebody calls up, hey, how come my water or my sewer bill is this much? Then the clerk can look them up. Well, you're in town, so your minimum charge is, she or he might want to say $12.02, but if you made it $12 even, then they'd be able to say it's $12, so $12, take that off, and what's left is the unit charges. And that was $5.65 per 100 cubic feet. And I see that you use this much volume, so it's $5.65 times that number of hundreds. You add those two parts together, that's your bill. and your clerk will probably be able to describe it just that quick to them. When it comes to describing to a caller why their bill is, how much it is, you want that to go really quick. You don't want it to be complicated. Well, your meter size is like this, and you're using this much volume, and we bill for the first 5,000 gallons at this rate, second 5 at a different, it makes it complicated. So it's hard for them to explain, and the longer it takes to explain it, the more the customer is likely to not be satisfied with the description. You all are almost all residential. You got some commercials, but the nature, the way they use water, the way they use sewer is very similar to a residential customer. So I saw no big benefit in basing the minimum charge on meter size. You're not going to reduce the bill for the small meter residential customer, which mostly comes in the minimum charge. You're not going to reduce their bill by very much with a meter size based minimum charge. So for simplicity's sake, it makes sense to have a level across the board minimum for water, same thing for sewer, at one level in town, different level out of town, but also level there. So it makes it easy for you all to administer, to describe to someone, and it makes very little difference in the bill for a small meter customer. Okay, that gets us through recommendations, and that is almost all that I wanted to just volunteer to you, but you all probably have some questions. So what can I answer?
Happy, I've got a question for you. I would say last year I had a discussion with an alliance manager, not the current manager, that expressed concern, the need, the possibility of a need for a new plant, up to and including a building. So I just envisioned, like, you can't shut water service down to build a new building, so land acquisition, construction, have these things run in tandem until you could cut over. Am I hearing that right? Or are you aware of any kind of requirement for a new plant?
He's been requesting it, but we haven't done any studies or looked into what the needs will be. I know our plant is aging. It'll be 30 years old in 2030.
Well, the time
at this point, we're looking at just trying to raise what we have currently, and we can readjust these if we need to look at a water plant in the future.
Okay, future being beyond 10 years.
Probably within 10 years, we need to start looking. Probably within 10 years, but that would be at the end of what this rate increase is.
So then, Mr. Brown, would that kind of factor weigh in on a study that big of a capital improvement, especially given that we may not qualify for grants or whatever to build? So this study's good for how long?
This study's good for 10 years, assuming that expenses come in kind of like what we have modeled.
And in table 5 and 6, I don't see anything about a new building, new plant, anything.
No, there's not a new plant in the plan for water. Now Happy does have a plan, or at least he knows that there are improvement needs, and he scheduled them out over all 10 years, and those are running in the vicinity of about 7 total capital improvement payouts. Now that includes what's being paid for by borrowing, but total payouts each year in the vicinity of about 400,000 up to, in the last year, $1.7 million. The 10th year it's got some big stuff.
Well, I wouldn't recommend we get into the weeds on the facility itself tonight, but I mean, certainly that needs to be on a roadmap. So that's got to be on the radar, like, hey, we may have to have a new plot, a new building, a new whatever, and then run 2 plants in tandem while we cut over.
So we figure out how to make it work in that particular plant itself, but we have not gone too far.
considering this, we need to make it work in that plant, right?
Well, I mean, what we're looking at is just trying to recover from where we are at this point. We have it on our 10-year plan of a water plant out in the future, but we aren't at that point. We need to get revenues up so that we're covering costs.
Gotcha.
And a little thing, another thing to kind of mull is I consider my rate analyses and future-looking rate studies, they're usually good. I mean, they got a shelf life of about 5 years. Because after 5 years, so many things are going to be different that it's really time to do it again and get back on track. So if you all go 5, 6 years, starting with these rates and then raising rates 4% a year, and then during that time, you hire an engineer, the engineer does a feasibility study, and they come up with $15 million for a plant, and they have some idea of about when that would be built. If it's still within the then next 10 years, then yep, it goes into the capital improvements plan, and yep, you ought to set rates that's going to take care of that. But right now, I could, speculate on cost, and sometimes I do calculate a what if you need to build a $15 million plant in year 6 or year 8 or whenever you kind of think you might need it. What if that happens? And what if we really want to look at probably the worst case scenario? You have to borrow all of it. No grants. You borrow all of it. I can plug that into a table 5, in fact, the table 5 of this model, and then I rerun the rates.
Okay.
And then you'll be able to see, well, if that really came to pass, then these rates we're going to adopt right now, they're not going to cover that. We're going to have to do it again.
Yeah, I looked, tables 5 and 6 look pretty detailed. You got pretty granular, but it didn't have that consideration in there, and I've never heard it talked about in this room before. So I think we need to, not tonight, but we need to have work session agenda items for what it would look like if we replace the water plant itself, the building. So.
That problem, one thing tag on to your issue, that problem is the same in almost every town and city and district. We have, for good reason, ratepayers don't want to pay high water and sewer bills. We put off having high enough rates so that we could build lots of really expensive stuff to serve them well, with less risk and all that kind of stuff on a timely basis. We're just keeping the infrastructure going best we can. But in most places, we're reaching the end of the time when we can do that, keep taping it together and failing wiring it together. We actually have to build new. Many of the cores of water and sewer systems were put in back in from about the 1950s to the 1980s or so. That's when a lot of the heavy duty infrastructure was put in. And even if it was put in the 80s, it's some old stuff now. And if it was put in the 50s, it's worn out.
Is there a typical percentage of grants to cover those costs of a replacement? Is there?
Now you're talking about replacement of infrastructure, pipes and plants.
Water plant.
Yeah. First, a description. I actually don't know of any grant program that will pay for just items that are considered to be equipment repair, refurbishment, and replacement. So think of it this way. Things that are not the overall plant, it's not all of that concrete out there, it's not a clarifier, it's not that sort of stuff. It's the pumps and motors, valves, and things that move and they wear out. And they wear out quicker than the overall plant does. So you have to replace, refurbish, do something to them to keep the overall plant functioning the way it was designed to function. That kind of stuff, repair and replacement items, they don't lend on that. They definitely don't give grants on that. They give grants and loans on building a new plant, building a clarifier, putting up a water tower, doing that level of stuff. Things that overall will last for quite a few decades. That's what they want to fund with grants and loans, and especially with grants. They just won't touch R&R with grants. The one exception, since I said that, is if you're going to build a $10 million plant and then there's $100,000 worth of equipment, repair and replacement that you want to shoehorn in there, yeah, they'll let you shoehorn in a little bit. But the vast majority of what they fund needs to be capital items, not wear and tear items.
I think that's what we were alluding to, the fact of a total replacement,
Yeah,
you know.
that's
so-
capital improvement.
Right, so there's no common number that says, you know, if we need to do a $10 million water plant, we could expect grants of 20%, 30%.
No, most of the grants are needs-based. So in other words, the poorest town or the poorest little water district, they are, and talking about the rate payers, the poorest folks in a town, if there's enough of them, then your median household income is real low, and that's the kind of a town or a place that they try to aim grants at. You all don't have a really high income, but your rates are also really cheap too, and it's pretty cheap to own and operate your current facilities. On the sewer side, 0.8 affordability index for your current rates. That's pretty surprising to me. I don't see that until I get into like a Cape Girardeau size place. So you all are really holding the line when it comes to costs, which has enabled you to keep your rates lower, but you can't do that forever. You got some improvements you got to make. So there's not, you know, if it's 10 million bucks, then they'll give you 25% of it in grant. They don't give grants that way. They give enough grants and or enough interest subsidized loan to get the resulting affordability index down to, for one utility, either water or sewer, they're usually aiming at 1.5% affordability. Even after the adjustment for water and for sewer, for you all, for the two combined, you still don't even get up to 2. It's 1.9 roughly. So grants are not likely. But apply anyway. Not all grants are needs-based, and I don't want to wish another gigantic economic upheaval like 2008 or COVID, and then the federal government shovels money out the door. I don't want to wish for that sort of thing, but that has happened before. So sometimes communities that otherwise, and gosh, this is terrible fiscal management, but sometimes communities that otherwise would not qualify for grants get some honking big grants. Some of my clients, after COVID, if they had a $2 million improvement they need to do, they got $1.5 million out of the recover from COVID programs. So yeah, we added to our debt and deficit. But on that count, and I'm getting into philosophy now as opposed to just calculating rates, but on that count, every one of you may feel that the federal government should not be shoveling money out the door But I will tell you, if the federal government is going to shovel money out the door, you should get it as opposed to somebody else. Otherwise, you're paying taxes, so somebody else gets money that you otherwise should have gotten. So if the rules of the game say you all can get a honkin' big grant, get the honkin' big grant. Just because you turn it down doesn't mean it's not going to get spent. It's going to go somewhere else. Now, yes, advocate to, bring some sanity to how we do finances at the federal level. I wish they'd let me do a rate analysis for them. But advocate for sane finances at the federal level. But until we get there, if they want to give away a bunch of money, then you should get a bunch of money as opposed to somebody else. Okay, enough philosophy. Any other questions? Well, you're welcome to still ask, but I'll kind of close this way. Given,
Quick question, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
There's some discussion about, our comprehensive plan has some, thoughts about bringing in additional, properties into the city through annexation. And so I know you can't account for that in your rate plans, but as we change, out of city users into city users, I'm just wondering how much that's going to change your rate analysis for us and what we should be doing, especially if some of those are big users.
that's multifaceted, having folks annex in. Just on the rates and the water and sewer utility revenue generation side, whoever comes in, they are then in town, so they pay the in-town rates, which if you adopt what I calculated, that would be 50% less. So however many of them there are, it's 50% less for the minimum charges. And however much volume they use, it's 50% less on the unit charge. So you will lose some of the projected revenue that I've got in the models if you have some folks or they voluntarily annex in. If there are not very many of them, if you're not going to change, if you're not going to have 10% of your customer base go from out of town to in town, it's not going to make an important difference in revenue. But if you end up annexing a really big area and a whole lot of out of town customers, and I don't think you have too many like that. But if you did annex a really big area with a lot of customers, yeah, it would affect the revenue.
Thank you.
Quick closing thoughts. If you all have questions and it's holding you up from being able to move forward with new rates, filter that to Happy, and then Happy will, put those things together, send it over to me, and then depending on what it is, I may just write a little letter or maybe even just an email to give you the answer to some simple, straightforward things. If it's complicated, then I may need to do some sort of model adjustment or something, in which case I probably would do a supplemental report to this one to address whatever that, big change was. But if you have any things like that, go ahead and give them to Happy. He can send them on to me, and we'll make sure that we have questions or concerns or things like that taken care of, so that you all can make adjustments pretty soon. When it comes to revenues needing to go up, waiting to raise the rates only puts you further behind. So you need to adjust rates as soon as you can to get started on the higher revenue generation rather than staying with the lower revenue generation. Otherwise, at some point you stay in the situation you're in, not able to do the things that you really need to do to the systems to make them function really well, make them last a real long time, Sometimes it's even to make them cheaper to own and operate. If you have some 20-year-old electric motors in your water and sewer systems, as compared to modern energy efficient motors, you would probably be able to pay for replacing those electric motors with the electric savings in the vicinity of about 5 years of what you would save off the electric bill. Some things that you would do, if you postpone doing them, you actually lose money by postponing doing them, because some things that you would do would make the system work so much more efficiently, especially electric things, to where you would save the cost of putting those things in, replacing that old stuff.
How often do you work with municipalities that are contracting their water and sewer services? And I didn't see that reflect, I didn't read 99 pages, I'm sorry, but how, do you see any difference in municipalities that are contracting their services versus cities that are having it in-house?
I can't really say that I have seen and known that I was seeing. Sometimes I just get an expense table, operating budget, and it just lists all the expenses, and there may be an expense for operation of the system or something like that, and it's $500,000 a year, and they just tell me, yeah, that's what it costs us to operate. Sometimes I may not even be aware that there's a contract operator, but I don't have very many that I do where there is a contract operator. I think most of the time the contractors help their client figure out how to set rates. Now, in the case of Alliance, and I have to say, Alliance does a dang good job in this regard. Alliance operates, I'm pretty sure they operate probably a few dozen, maybe even many dozen water and sewer systems in Missouri and then elsewhere. But they've actually requested that their client system have me or have someone else, a third-party analyst, analyze rates so they're not in the middle of it. Alliance is really good about that. But as best I can tell, Alliance can often operate a system for cheaper than what you all could operate it in-house. I think that's fairly common with Alliance. Now, some are pretty expensive, but I think Alliance does pretty well that way. I used to work for Missouri DNR. You have to, do some stuff to get permitted, to be in compliance and all that kind of stuff with the permitting agency. And I did not directly do permitting, but since I was calculating rates and I was doing technical assistance for systems building plants and things like that, I had to kind of work with the permit guys. And I have had many clients say it's worth a lot not to have to deal with the permitting and especially the compliance. Now, Alliance does a good job of compliance. I suspect that you all have had none or very few and probably no really important compliance issues because they know how to comply.
Well, that's the reason why we hired him. We were in contempt for a while there, so we had to bring him in and clean house. So.
Yeah. And then one thing that I do like about the bigger contract operations firms, and some of them are own operate, but one thing I do like about them is they're bigger than you all. They have staff in a lot of places. And their staff have a wealth of knowledge, understanding about how to operate and keep in compliance lots of different kinds of technologies. There are lots of different kinds of plants. So if your main operating staff from Alliance here, if the main staff does not know how to solve some problem they have with your plant, they got some other folks in-house they can go talk to and find out. Right. Good issues and questions.
I would just say, it was a wonderful presentation.
Oh, well, thank you.
The depth of this field is amazing, and you presented it clearly, and I find it hard to question anything you came up with, since you know so much about it than most people sitting in the room.
I try to achieve that. Sometimes I can't achieve that with every board or council, but it's a balancing act. And I talked in the beginning about it. I ran a lot of models for you all, lots of permutations of what could happen, might happen, would be a dreaded thing to happen. I ran a lot of models. And then between my understanding of your situation and then Happy's and Sue's is really good, they're helping to guide me. I arrived at only 2 models, 1 water, 1 sewer, most likely, most advantageous, that sort of thing, so that I could keep it simpler for you all. It's still really long. And there's a lot of in the weeds stuff in there, but I do try to make it kind of digestible if you sit and kind of ponder it a little bit while you're reading through. But I also try to make it so that if you just don't want to do that, you just want to know, well, what's the answer? Well, the answer is tables A and B and C and D. That's the answer to this great big problem.
Well, when you're talking sewers, it's important to keep it digestible.
I see what you did there.
Thanks, Eric Bennett. Thanks all.
Okay, you all have been great to work with, Happy and Sue especially, a lot.
One more question. When you look at tables, or pages 75 and 99, the cash reserves after inflation, the sum of all reserves for both water and sewer, I mean, you paint a pretty dire picture what it looks like in 2035 if we don't basically raise rates. You come up with analysis of how, but if we don't, if we kind of stay on course.
No, we'll be in the red big time.
Yeah.
A few things about that. One is my template. It's a hunkin' big spreadsheet. My template actually has 2 faces to it. One is the visible face, those tables that I printed out, and they're in that report. That's the visible part. That's the part of the template where I model things that might happen, and then I model new rates. So a higher minimum, higher unit charge, all that sort of stuff. And then that is what's in the lettered tables. In the background, I have the equivalent of that same template, but the background calculator makes the assumption that wherever your rates are right now, you're going to keep those for the next 10 years. Now, you're probably not going to do that. In fact, if your expenses come around, like what we've got in the forward-facing part of the model, if your expenses happen like that, I'm also assuming they will happen in the background, then you go in the red. You go in the red by a ton. But you're not going to let that happen. You will figure out in a year or 2, you know what, even if we don't do hardly anything to the system, the inflation's still happening in the budget. We're going to have to raise rates, and you might raise rates 2, 3, 5%. Do something like that, at least to stay above board. You won't let yourself go in the red, at least seriously, for a long time. It just won't happen. But to have a basis for comparison so that I don't have to go into the background part of the model and make special changes, I just make the assumption, no rate adjustment for 10 years. And then that red line looks really ugly. But what it does do for you is if you calculate the dollar difference between the red line and the blue line, that's the extra revenue you generate with those rates and inflationary increases over the years. That is the revenue that you need to be able to do all the stuff that's in the Table 5 capital improvements plan, the operating budget with inflation and stuff like that.
So your red line, because I originally put a paper clip on page 74 and 75, your red lines on there basically are at the current rates with no future increases.
That's right.
That we've already historically added.
That's right.
So that
Yeah, but
number in
that's-
between the
how
red
much of
line
those
and the
rate
blue
increases
line
are-
would be somewhat different than that if we keep up our normal.
But it's still gonna, you're still looking at.
Right, still looking at right,
So it would still.
but not quite as bad as it does in these charts.
But
That's right. It won't be, that's worst case scenario.
Right.
Expenses keep going up, but you don't raise your rates. But of course, you won't let worst case come about. You'll head that off. Partly, you'll head it off by eliminating some costs. You won't replace some lines, you won't do some capital improvements because you don't have the money for it, which is kind of where you're at now, and we want to get you out of that cycle. All right. You all might think of something else later on when you kind of mull things over, ship that over to Happy. We'll get it all tied up for you. But like I said, don't mull for a long time. As you all brought out, if you need to replace a treatment plant, oh my gosh, you're really talking a whole different level of rates. But we got to get you up to speed on at least the current expenses and the expectable capital improvement expenses. So we'll take a few steps there, and then if the other comes about, then we'll deal with that. Well, folks, good talking to y'all, good answering some questions. Hopefully you have a pretty good sense. And then you'll move along like I'm pretty sure almost all my clients do. They realize, yeah, we got these capital improvements, we got these things coming, and the only thing that's different between you and Cape Girardeau or some other place that I've analyzed rates for, and they've since adjusted rates, the only difference is they have gotten to this place before you. But you're getting to this place now, and there will be others who have cheap, I don't know, it might be kind of hard to find too many places that have cheaper rates than you all, but there will be some others that have cheaper rates than you right now, and then they will reach this place. And no, we don't all get over the finish line at the same time, but eventually we're all going to have to get over that finish line. All right. Well, I'm going to stop bending your ears, and I'll let you all think and do whatever it is you need to do.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
All the work and your presentation tonight.
Yeah, so our plan would be we need to do a public hearing on this, so I would want to advertise it with the rates that are presented in the model. Set up that, we have to do it within 30 days or 30 days out. We have to do a public hearing. So we want to get that established now so we can get that on the agenda and then have that public hearing and then look at adopting the rates. So I don't hear anything negative. So we're going to move forward with it. I mean, you always have the opportunity at that time to discuss it more.
Are you good with that outcome?
Yeah.
Wonderful. All right. Okay. at this time then, we will move on to work session agenda item number 2. This will be discussion regarding the Independence Center. Yeah, we could motion to do that. Just a second, Jason.
That's fine.
And we do have an option to go into closed session. I would ask that if you are going to motion to go into closed session, that you motion to do a that you motion for both agenda items, so that we can just make one motion to do that.
I make a motion to go into closed session for items 2 and 3. For the purposes of discussing real estate.
Sorry. Okay, I have a motion and a second. Pam, roll call, please.
Alderwoman Dobbs. Yes. Alderman Fahey.
Yes.
Alderman Donovan.
Yes.
Alderman Eidman.
Yes.
Alderman Rainey.
Yes.
Alderman Prince.
Yes.
Alderman Steiger.
Yes.
Okay, thank you all for your time tonight. We are adjourned. Happy St. Patrick's Day.